Oh, don't tell me she wasn't here.
You're like a woman on that phone, Fred.
Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of the local planning agency to order. It is just about 8:30. And the first order is to call the roll.
Sam Vincent,
Here?
Don Colapetro. Here. Chairman Byrd,
Here.
Bob Thinis,
Here.
Rex Sims,
Here.
Fred Forbes,
Here.
Carolyn Gallagher.
She's excused, I
morning, Ray.
understand. Okay, the next thing is the appointment of a vice chair. Do I hear a nomination for a vice chair from the board?
I would nominate Bob Thinis right here.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, the next thing is the review of the following ordinance for consistency with the comprehensive plan. Is that something that you read, Audrey?
I will. I'll at least start it, although I wish I had some additional staff here, but let me explain. This is an ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs, amending Bonita Springs Land Development Code, Chapter 3, which is the Development Standards Chapter, amending Sections 3-262, regulating security lighting within public and private right-of-ways, and also amending 3-608, site design standards, providing for conflicts of law, severability, codification, scrivener's errors, inclusion in code, and an effective date. At this time, we're requesting that the LPA review the ordinance for consistency with the comprehensive plan. I don't even know if any, I mean, obviously, we have the general language in the comprehensive plans of making sure we regulate for the, help me,
Safety.
for safety, to try to keep things aesthetically and quality of life type provisions. I did not bring comp plan provisions with me today to show where it would fall in within the comprehensive plan, but I don't know of anything in the comprehensive plan where this would be inconsistent. If I can explain the purpose of the provisions, the city adopted dark sky provisions, I believe in 2008, 2009, and the LPA is familiar with those. During the course of it, we allowed lights to continue their use. There were two issues. We allowed lights to continue their use, and, so that people were able to use their existing wall-mounted light fixtures. The problem that occurs is, we're not knowing when somebody replaces their light fixtures, so you can't really tell when a grandfathered use ceases. So instead of going that way, we suggested having a drop-dead date. Originally, people wanted 3 years from the date of the ordinance. I wanted to have a fixed date, and I put in a fixed date that was roughly a little more than 3 years. And then council, at their meeting to advertise this, gave us standards by January 1, 2020. The second thing in the ordinance that applies is that security lighting is being regulated. And security lighting is that wonderful, I call it the lighting that nobody exactly knows what happens. And a good example, there's a restaurant on Bonita Beach Road where they went in, they had their photometric procedures. This is their lighting plan. Everything was great and hunky-dory. And then they contacted Florida Power and Light to put up their security lights. On this case, we are requiring, and this is, so it's kind of a no man's land. It's not exactly inside a development. It's that land that's in the strip of the right-of-way. So to, again, go in the spirit of dark skies, but also to take care of people's protection and such, we now have regulations, and this is the first time we have regulations as to the lights that go in the light poles, whether it's residential or, but the things that are put up by Florida Power and Light. I had some concerns about this because security lighting does fall within the definition of street lights in Florida Statute Section 768, 1382. Now, let me tell you about Section 768. That's the chapter that provides indemnification for negligence. So the biggest concern that I had is if we went and we told Florida Power and Light, this is how you do your lighting, we would then be named into lawsuits when something bad happens, when there's a lighting malfunction. So you'll see in this ordinance reference to 768-1382. That requires a notification if a light is not functioning correctly. It requires a notification if you're going to remove a light, mainly for the public safety. So that's where that part is intermixed. I believe that's it. Oh, and then later on, we talk about in Ordinance 608, when the LPA put in design standards. Again, lighting standards were relatively rudimentary. We did have some language there, and so we just wanted to make sure lighting meets the standards found in Section 3-262.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. Any comments from the,
I have one.
go ahead.
Let me ask, Audrey, why, in 768, why would the legislators place it in that particular part of the statute?
In 768, because governments and Florida Power and Light, which is a semi-government in the sense, this is, 768 is where you have your negligence and basically what lawyers call torts. So it's the section where you would go to find where we have our indemnification. The one I'm near and dear to is 768-28, because I live, eat, and sleep that section. That's the provisions that would have how much you can sue a government for negligence. Now, obviously, contract is different. There are some other things. You have your sections for Good Samaritan. I believe Good Samaritan is in that section. So they put this section in there because this is something that the public would be able to deal with negligence. It's a negligence chapter.
So they're assuming that, not assuming, but how would I say it, that they intentionally put it in there because it allows then for lawsuits to take place, or?
All right, let me give a little history. And what was happening in the state of Florida in the early 2000s, where a couple cases came out where people were either raped or stabbed in a dangerous area where the lights were out. And this is probably the time government was also, some governments thought, well, we'll save money by turning off half our lights.
Okay.
So all of a sudden you had a bus stop that used to have lighting, no longer have lighting. So what was happening, it wasn't the government, it wasn't Florida Power and Light that went out and did the stabbing, did the rape, but they said there was some causation there. And because of that causation, you could not be dismissed from a lawsuit. So that created a deep, some deep pockets, because generally people who stab and rape do not have a lot of money. I guess it could happen, I don't want to say it never happens, but, so they look, a lot of times the personal injury attorneys that are representing the people who are injured look for other people who had some part of it or some cause of it. And there were cases that were coming out saying, yeah, this is a question for the jury to make that decision. Mm-hmm. And, of course, governments like us, whether it's a county, city, school board, as well as Florida Power and Light, went to the legislature and says, you got to help us. And they said, okay, we'll help you. We'll adopt this law and say you will not be negligent for a light out as long as you follow certain procedures. And if you follow those procedures, so we adopted an administrative code saying these are the procedures for if we have lights that are going out. I bet, I feel bad because I get my bills online, and I haven't checked to see this, but when you get your Florida Power and Light bill, they'll send you notices in those bills, the little flyers. They're supposed to give notification to people if something happens. And that protects both the government and Florida Power and Light from being dragged into a lawsuit. And I just wanted to make sure when we adopted this section, we didn't do some action that inadvertently dragged us into a lawsuit.
But what they wanted to do is have somebody responsible for these light fixtures that are out, namely Florida Power and Light, if they put it up.
Right, but remember, Florida Power and Light doesn't necessarily even know that a light fixture is out unless somebody notifies them. So there's certain notification requirements both ways. So if, let's say, a light is malfunctioning and it's out, Florida Power and Light doesn't know, maybe we don't know. There's rules now in place saying this is how you give us notice.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't need to be in here, we have a separate code for that, but you want this section to be in conformance, especially if we start telling people, turn off the lights.
Well, that's the loophole there, that I lived in a neighborhood where 2 lights were out for years. and nobody reported it because they didn't care. Now, what should have been done, I don't know why I'm saying should have been done, but Florida Power and Light should have someone that drives around at night.
And the problem, I don't disagree, but also, what would our electric bill be if Florida Power and Light just had people drive around at night looking for
They
lights?
do have people that drive around at night.
Looking for lights?
Well, I don't know if they're looking for lights, but you see those trucks
Yeah,
out
they hit,
cruising
right.
around. So,
And they do. And they probably have different.
But that's the only part
wires.
that was left out of this is that,
Yeah.
you know, we have to report it, and most of the time it doesn't happen.
Right, but that's not our fault, government's
No.
fault, or,
But to report it, you have to go to the pole, look at the number on the pole, and then call
really?
about that.
I
Yes.
didn't know that.
You can't just say it's out on a certain street. They want to know what number is on that pole.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. So, I mean, it makes you get out and have to do a little bit of work to report a light that's out.
okay.
Any other comments?
Yes.
Rex?
Yeah.
I have absolutely no argument with Audrey's position here, but I look at this thing, when you examine it in minute detail, and you look at it like it is going to be enforced, it's like using a cannon to swat a fly. And here's why. This ordinance only covers commercial properties, but it covers every commercial property. It says for every development order or building permit. So everybody has to jump through this hoop. So first off, it's not a business-friendly ordinance. And the second thing is, for anybody's information that doesn't know, how these numbers get established is, I had a lengthy conversation with an engineer from Sylvania. They hire they have a laboratory, and they prepare a test, and they have a testing lab come, and they have a 20 by 20 grid on the floor, and perfect laboratory conditions, and a certain light with a certain lens, with a certain crown at a certain elevation, produces these numbers that architects like yourself and engineers like Fred use in their design. Well, and that's the perfect condition. Now, when I talked to the engineer from Sylvania, he said you could take 3 technicians and one instrument and go out there and take an on-site field installation as installed, and you're going to get 3 numbers, and none of them are going to be close to what is in the catalog. It's just not going to happen. A half a block down the street is a tennis court or cars driving by, and they affect this reading. So getting an on-site as-built reading is extremely difficult, and we are asking for that. On page
Page 2?
page 6, we are calling for, prior to the final inspection, site verified. Site means taken at the site. Site verified foot candle readings must be provided, and that conforms with the plans. And here's the kicker: a letter of compliance provided by a registered professional engineer. So if you're a registered professional engineer and you're going to sign this thing and put your stamp on it, which opens you to liability, you want to make sure that you either witnessed those drawings or those tests, or somebody that you have a lot of faith in took those tests. So this involves a level, somebody's going to have to hire an illumination engineer that is qualified. Now, in this thing, we don't specify who's going to certify the instruments that are tested, because they're just like any other instrument. In order for it to mean anything, they have to be certified. We also don't say what kind of engineer we're going to have. Could an aeronautical engineer do this? Could Fred do it, who's a civil engineer, who makes sure water runs downhill? So I look at it and saying, there's a lot of things that we have put in here to make this very, very difficult, but we really haven't clarified who qualifies to do this. And could a civil engineer do it? You know, could the aeronautical engineer do it? You know, who is qualified to certify these readings? Then the other thing that bothers me in particular about this was the fact that back on page 3, under item 4, it talks about the lowest possible illumination to meet this design standard. So if, Fred, you're designing something and they're telling you here that you, to provide this, you have to use the smallest number that meets the code. Yet, they do not say what this number is. It just says the smallest number. Well, what is it within 10% of the smallest number, or is it within 50% of the smallest number? There's no real criteria that says that you are actually meeting the code. It just says, be good, you know, type thing. The other, there's a question about signs in here, of course, but what was the other? Oh, has a discussion about light poles.
What page, Rex?
Well, someplace here, it talks about, on page 6, it talks about security light fixtures may not exceed 25 feet in height. Security lights are provided by Florida Power and Light, and they use a pole that's there. I do not know what height mine are in the back, whether they're more than 25 feet or not, but when you call them, they come and pick out a pole that has electricity to it, and they put the darn thing on there. Then it says they cannot be closer than 50 feet to one another. Many of the poles have two lights on them, one pointing one direction and one pointing the other. Mm-hmm. But in the strictest interpretation of this line right here, we couldn't do that. And so I think this thing needs some work. And I am reluctant to foster it onto our people in our community.
Audrey's, nobody's here, John's not here.
Yes, I'm surprised by that also.
Yeah.
As far as some of the things, if I may respond to Mr. Sims, most of the things that he mentioned deal with the science of engineering that I'm not qualified to answer, nor will I try, but it is things that are existing in the already existing ordinance. The only one where it was not existing, and I think it's a good point, is item C2, which has the, whether the light fixture, if you could have a double light fixture. So if you had a neighbor who, needs directional lighting that way, or let's say a sidewalk.
Yeah.
If you needed to do a dual directional for a sidewalk, say it's on a corner, you'd probably, that's something I don't know the answer to.
Okay.
I know I don't know the answer to, but I think I know the problem.
Yeah.
Which at least then we can take it to staff and say, fix that.
Well, I know-
problem.
Well, Audrey, my contention is that doing a site compliance at the, prior to your final inspection is a very, very difficult thing. That I do not believe that the average building permit for a commercial building is going to require that. If, in my mind, I think what we need to do, rather than do a on-site measurement of this thing, is to have the architect certify that the contractor used the light fixture that was specified on the drawings, because those numbers have been certified by the manufacturer under very, very stringent conditions. So as long as the contractor used the fixture and the bulb and the lens and the cover that is specified on the drawings, which were designed to the manufacturer's specifications, then it should comply. But to actually go out and physically measure it is going to be a big hassle.
Fred?
Yeah, I had comments similar to what Rex was saying. Number one, this table one, it seems to me that the maximum numbers are, there's only two sets of maximum numbers. I think it's 4.1 and something like 5.1. Most of them are 4.1 except the last two. And that's pretty light. I mean, that's a lot of illumination. I mean, if you think about inside a building, and Sam, I think, probably can help me on this, but like a corridor or a restroom, what is it, 10-foot candles, somewhere in that vicinity?
The restroom, you mean inside?
It's not very bright.
That has more to do with a mood setting and so forth, rather than security.
I think
Well,
public
well, yeah,
restrooms
but
is what
it's-
he's talking
Oh,
about.
public restrooms, yeah,
Yeah.
would be, it would be something dark like that.
All I'm saying is that it seems like the maximum numbers, some of them are probably higher than they might ought to be, because, and the higher that number, the more electricity is burned, no matter what kind of bulb you use to produce it. And then the other thing that you want to remember is that light fixture is at its brightest and all that the day it's put in, because it's got a clean lens, both inside and out. The bulb is clean and the bulb is new, and it goes downhill from there. So I agree with Rex. I think probably, maybe is there a way between now and the next, what is it, the first reading of the ordinance?
Yes, actually, we have, this ordinance is scheduled for mid-April and early May.
Right.
And I do plan to have a few more ordinances, so I can bring it back to you, but I don't know, first of all, the changes that you're proposing are what I call changes of science. I know enough to know I don't know what to do.
All I was going to propose is maybe that whoever authored this could get with an illumination engineer, or like Rex was talking about, a big fixture manufacturer, and get their thoughts, bring it back to us real quickly. And
So you're not talking about the current proposed changes, you're talking about the new, or the old language
Yeah.
for the city to get a photometric engineer who would coordinate it, and I can tell you that might take several months. That just kills this.
no, I think I would go to a light fixture manufacturer, because if you go to an engineer, they're gonna do just what Rex is saying we shouldn't do, which is say, oh yeah, you need an engineer to go out and certify the installation once it's done, and that's gonna cost the owner a lot of money. There's
Don?
I got a couple things along that line. First of all, I'm in agreement there, and number one, if we go to table one, unless they've changed the standard since I bought my first light meter, a foot candle is the actual illumination from one candle in total darkness measured at 1 foot.
Right.
right.
Not what you'd call blinding. So when you're looking at standards that call for 1.2, it's not a lot of lighting. Whether it's incandescent or LED, which is what it should be in the modern day and age. Secondly, above table one, under number one, illuminance, that needs to be looked at real close, because it makes no sense and it doesn't give you a standard. It says on the second to last line, foot candles on the task surface, for example, the parking lot or other surface, with a light meter held parallel to the ground or other surface facing up. You got to pick one. You can't do both. And it says, unless otherwise stated, at what height?
Have you looked at footnotes 2 and 4 to the illumination level requirements? This is how much light spillage is to be off of property. So yes, you're correct, it's a very low light footage, but that is because this is where we expect the light
Right.
to travel off of property, not to be on the
I
property.
understand, but you got to establish a
Yeah.
height from the ground
Right.
to hold a meter, and is the photo cell on the meter either facing upwards or is it facing horizontally? That's got to be looked at. My other one, and it kind of bothers me,
See, I'm not finding difficulty with this direction. If I had a light meter in my hand,
Yes.
I would hold the light meter parallel to the ground or other task
parallel to
surface,
the ground.
facing up. So,
But
looking towards the light. I mean,
if you hold it at,
Photo cells on the end,
yeah,
99% of them. I guess, I'm sure there's one that's the other way, but that needs,
Yeah.
because somebody's going to play with that. That needs to be,
yeah, I mean, and that is a problem. You do have people who, and your culprits tend to be good people, banks,
Right.
retail
Right.
places,
Just not
places
doing-
that get robbed,
right.
like
But
to have
and it
strong
should be at a
lights.
uniform height from the
Right.
ground, okay?
that's very
Anything
important.
else, Don?
But it talks
My other
about
one-
task surface, parking lot or task surface.
My other one is on the next page, under 4. We talked about that before, about the safety aspect. And it says, intensity level should provide the lowest possible illumination to discourage crime and undesirable activity and to effectively allow surveillance, but may not exceed 50% of the levels normally permitted.
You know, if I worked in development services and I knew how they permitted things, if I worked in code enforcement and knew how they handle enforcement of this, I could answer your questions. I do not work in those two departments, and I apologize. I
Well,
do not know how to
It
respond.
just seems like if you were allowing, and let's just pick a number, 5 foot candles at whatever height is determined, then you're gonna, for security reasons, you're only gonna allow 2.5. If you look at some of the security footage that you see on TV where they're asking for help in identifying an individual.
Right, and it's very
an
dark.
awful lot more than 2.5, and I can just imagine what it would be like, in the dark when you got the bad guys out there.
Yeah.
It just, those were the two things that
Sam?
really stuck out at me.
Well, this is all sounding plausible. There's some statutes that the state has regarding lighting levels as it pertains to banks and shopping centers and gas stations, and it has to do with safety, meaning that I can have a lot of foot candles over a car, but they throw shadows. Things throw shadows, and so a lot of these light levels are related to those shadows that are cast by different objects. So, we're getting pretty deep into the science of this thing, and I'm wondering, we're looking at sections that are written and are enforced now.
Right, right. This is
Are we
the
recommending to
code.
the council that we go back and review all these?
That's what I'm wondering, if that's what you want, and I don't know if that's what staff has planned for the future. This is just a make-fix,
For,
request of a council member, request of code enforcement. First of all, there's two issues that I see that we're here for today, and you're bringing up wonderful issues, but it's not something that was a subject that we were planning on amending or talking about. The two subjects is, currently, we allow a grandfathered light to exist. Can we put in a drop-dead date? The drop-dead date has been changed to 2020, so 6 years from now, roughly. They would then have to take out that fixture. I'm looking back there too, see if we see somebody who can answer it. The second thing is dealing with security lines, because right now we don't regulate them. It's the Wild West.
well, currently, for new construction, you can't have more than .5 foot candles at the property line.
Okay?
That's pretty low. So you see, we're already controlling spillage onto the next
Right.
property. And so if you're reading a fixture that might be or off the property line, whatever it is, whatever manufacturer, it can't exceed .5 at the property line. Now, when you take a light meter and you read this, depending on where you stand and you're oriented, you have to be facing one property or another because of that additional lighting that you get from the other site. So I think that's controlled fairly well right now. I know the community development looks at that very closely, and I know I do when I review the plans.
Sure.
So, so far, that hasn't been a problem. That's why I'm asking, are we going back now and saying that's not good, we need to do something different?
Well, are you saying, are we LPA going back, or we?
Yes,
sending
LPA
out
going back.
information? Thank you, because that's the difference.
I see
can't
that
answer-
John Dunn was here, maybe he can shed some light on this.
No pun intended?
Yeah, no pun intended.
Morning.
Morning, John.
There were some specific questions. I guess we could start with Rex, and
Morning.
wanted to review some of your concerns
I'll
with
s-
John?
Let me, as I
Or maybe you can
characterize
recap
it.
it. Maybe you can recap it.
Rex, first of all, let me start even before Rex. Sam and I had a discussion on the negligence statute, which is now in the security lighting. I explained to the LPA that the amendments have two components. One component is the fact that we have existing grandfathered lights. Well, code enforcement can't go out and do enforcement because we don't know which is grandfathered, which is not grandfathered. So for building mounted luminaries, we're now putting a drop dead date of the 2020. It used to be 3 years, it got moved up by council.
Correct.
The second thing is the security lighting. Rex had some concerns as to the already existing language within the ordinance. The main concerns he had is, and repeated by Don Colapietro, it's not just Rex, as to the candle footage being very, very low, and also as to the precision of how to do measurements. For example, there's language in here that talks about an engineer needing to do certification, and yet, the on-site is always going to be somewhat different after installation. And let me know if I'm not repeating this somewhat correctly. I'm kind of melding both of your points together. How the process goes with development services to make sure everything is properly certified. And then Mr. Colapietro had questions as to Table 1 and the illuminance. He has I guess a photometric reader.
Light
So
meter.
a light reader, so he's very familiar with the process. And his concern was that the foot candles at the edge of the property where it's being measured is extremely low, and this is the current language.
It
Now-
is designed to be extremely low. And the reason being is that we are not looking at light going over a property line as a good thing. You are entitled to light your property. Commercial properties need to have light for security. That light needs to be designed in such a way that it does not impede their neighbors, regardless of who their neighbor happens to be. And so you keep that light at the property line virtually non-existent to keep that light pollution, as it's known, from spilling over. So you're exactly right. In fact, it's low, but it is designed to be low. And that standard was not really one of our own creating. That was one that dates back to our Lee County days that has been carried over. I never looked at that as an issue because lighting can be designed in a way that does not spill over the property line, and we've looked to keep that standard in place. And what we're looking at today for the security lighting generally works hand in hand with that, because what we have is a situation that a lot of lights of this nature are installed without permits, and there is significant light pollution that goes from one property to another. So what we're looking to do is to allow for the possibility of that security lighting and the protection that that light provides while keeping that light from adjacent property owners. Sometimes the adjacent property owner may be another commercial or industrial site where it doesn't necessarily have that much of an impact on the owner itself. But in other situations, you could have commercial that is in front of residential developments where that light causes a significant problem where it comes into someone's bedroom window. So we keep the standard the same so that it doesn't matter who that tenant is or who that property owner is adjacent to this commercial site, but that we keep that light from causing a negative impact on their standard of living.
Understand, but in that line, my biggest concern there was the instructions on using the light meter. It says held parallel to the ground, and then it says facing up. You got to pick one, and it does not specify the height from ground level at which you take the measurement, and that needs to be uniform, to be fair to everybody.
I don't disagree with that. I don't have any problems with providing a little more specificity. I don't know if we'd be able to put it into this round of changes, but I wouldn't mind bringing it up as soon as we can bring it forward to.
It just
include
make
that.
it easier. And on the fixtures themselves, rather than go through all the extra expense, and that's something that the city has always tried, I would hope not to do, is to burden a developer or an individual when he's developing a piece of property. Why can't we take the lighting manufacturer's specifications, and as long as the builder or the contractor adheres to that specific fixture and its installation and its whatever type of illumination it's using, and use that, rather than put somebody through unnecessary hoops and hurdles.
We usually do at the building permit stage, because that's when a developer or an owner knows exactly what type of fixture they're going to install. At the development order stage, when you're looking at reviewing the engineering plans for these commercial projects, the type of fixture is generally not known. They know kind of what they want to do with the light, but they don't know exactly which fixture will provide that light. So if someone has that level of detail at the development order phase, we're more than happy to review it and include it as part of the plans. They can provide that cut sheet that the manufacturer provides and use that to back up the data. Sometimes that's available and sometimes it's not.
Fred?
Well, putting in a standard height that the meter's going to be off the ground, Audrey can do that right now.
And I don't have any problems.
3 feet or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a simple change.
As you move that meter 6 inches, you're going to change the reading. And if you got some place where something's in violation, all you have to do is move that meter down or up a little bit, and it's going to
That's
change.
correct, and you could have 2 different code enforcement inspectors going out there on different days and come up with different readings.
Oh,
'cause
that's
they're
right, but at
building
least if this height that the meter's supposed to be above the ground is consistent, you've got one more variable out of it. There was another, oh yeah, most of the time that people do lighting for like a parking lot, for example, because there's enough poles involved and fixture heads, the lighting, there'll be a company that sells or distributes those fixtures, that particular brand and pole, and they develop for you free, this is for the builder or the owner, like a plan that actually shows the lighting you're going to get for a
That's true.
specific fixture.
And sometimes those are provided to us from the lighting manufacturer.
Well,
Sometimes
well-
they're provided by the engineer.
All I was going to propose was to go along with what Rex said, instead of having to have the owner or the developer or the builder have to bring in an engineer to certify this stuff off. If you get that plan submitted by the fixture supplier and all that, it's done with a computer. It's not done by just hand
Those
calculating.
plans that we've received from light manufacturers are those manufacturers that have engineers on staff. So regardless of whether it's the lighting manufacturer or whether it's a developer hiring an engineer to provide these plans for them, they are being provided by engineers.
Right.
Well,
If I
that
could
brings up my question though, John. We're not saying that in this ordinance. This ordinance on page 5 says that prior to the final inspection, which means to me your walkthrough with the utility guy and the fire inspector and the building inspector and so forth. Prior to doing that, they're going to do a site verified. Site verified means that somebody is on that site at that particular place is going to take readings, and those readings have to somehow match what the manufacturer supplied. They are not going to unless you're in total darkness and you don't have any cars going by or any ambient lighting in the neighborhood and so forth and so on. Site verified is a very, very difficult thing, but not only are we saying that they got to be site verified, but they've got to be sealed or signed by a registered professional engineer that those were correct. And no engineer in the right mind is going to sign off something unless they either participated in it or one of their staff members actually did the thing. So I'm looking at this because this encompasses everybody. It says for every development order and every building permit. So the ice cream store has to jump through this just the same as a major developer has to. So we are putting a burden that I do not believe has on everybody, that I don't believe has warranted this amount of effort. I think we could design something that would take care of the problems that may have developed down through the years. But to have this encompass every single building permit that is issued by the city, have a registered professional engineer sign this and seal it and so forth, is an overkill.
Currently, that is what we require, and that is what we have required for the past 14 years. To date, those that are preparing development order plans are engineers, and as part of those development order plans, they would include the lighting as well. So you don't have a situation where you have someone that it needs to hire a consultant that does not already have that consultant. This is just a portion of that scope for the plans that they would be submitting to our department.
We're going to split hairs here, John. I disagree with your verdict there. This appears the way it is written and the way I read it, that if for this specific building permit, we're going to have site verified, which means somebody has to go and take it at that site. It's not something that they're looking on a plan. We're not able to do this from the approval of the plan. We're going to do it, we're going to take readings as site verified, and it's going to be done prior at the closing inspection. That indicates to me that it's not something that we're going to get approval from the drawings that you stamp, okay. We've got to have somebody go out and physically do this the way it's written, and I think
Actually, it's both.
that's an overkill.
But how is it currently being handled? Because it is currently law, correct?
That's the current regulation, and what's done is the photometric plans are reviewed and approved as part of the development order. So if you want to construct a site, you submit your plans, those are reviewed. As part of those plans will be a page that's the photometrics, at least one page, if not more. We check to make sure that the foot candles are appropriate at the property line, that the heights of the fixtures are not too high. We don't have fixtures that violate dark skies ordinance. And then once those are approved, the developer goes out to construct the site. And when we construct, during the inspections of construction of the site, we check to make sure that what's on the plans is indeed the truth. There are times that we do need to verify.
You don't actually measure it.
That's what I was going to get to right before you got me. It was there are times that we do need to inspect to make sure that that light is correct, and there are times that because of the nature of the design, it is not necessary to inspect. Those sites that are right up against the regulation in terms of their foot candles at the property line, those sites do need to be inspected. Those sites that are not lighting the perimeter of their property, they don't need to be. If you start looking at...
But this doesn't give that option. This says all building permits and all development orders
Yes.
will have a site verified. So technically, on every building permit you issue under this, as I interpret my
Mr.
very
Sims,
meager
would you like me to go back
understanding
and
of
change
it,
this?
Everyone has to be verified.
Is this something that this board would like us to go back and amend, or is this something, because this is not something we're really supposed to be discussing because it's an
I
existing
understand that.
standard.
Right.
So if you would like us to go back and make the change, we'd be more than happy to go back.
And let me defend this language for a minute. When we receive tons of permit applications, whether it's a development order, building permit, light permit, these guys get thousands a year. People submit the plans, and it doesn't even have to be a lighting issue. It could be any other issue. They tell us what they're doing. It looks good. Engineer signed. Everything was verified. Everything looks great. 3 months later, 2 months later, 1 week later, we get the call in to code enforcement. There's light spillage. and that's, so, that again will be where another site verification occurs. So you have the engineer telling us in the first place, yes, everything is great, everything meets your codes, everything is compliant. And, if somebody signs and seals it, neither I nor John have the authority to tell an engineer or an architect they're wrong. I mean, I might think you're wrong, but I don't have the.
Happens all the time.
I know, but I don't have I don't have the legal authority to say that. But my enforcement guys will go out there and they'll do a verification. Now, how they hold the machine to do the measurement, I think depends on the officer's training, but it's no different than if we were doing, I think of DUIs, calibration for breathalyzers. There's different manufacturer requirements, and I'm not comfortable modifying code provisions because it does say unless otherwise specified. So my guess is somebody, and it does say where the task surface is. If we start trying to put contrived measurements, I have fill on my property, you don't have fill on your property, we're going to have a difference of, where that measurement location could be by about a 3-foot variable. I mean, so I'm not seeing where I feel comfortable making changes to the existing language. I prefer to just be on the subject matter we're handling. I hope we're helping the LPA address their questions.
All right.
But it's an enforcement issue, and I think, our enforcement guys work hard on trying to make sure it goes within that verification
Sa-
system.
Well,
Sam
Audrey, I
has a
have
comment.
just two things. One was my original question about it being a statue in that location, because it gives someone an opportunity here to take someone to court. And the second because it falls into that area, and an angry owner of adjacent property. The second thing is, we're throwing a lot on plan reviewers that happens. It happens all the time. John, you can confirm this. Is that, well, you gave me an approval, therefore it must be correct. Well, some of these people that review these plans are not scientists with lighting. They have to take what's given to them.
Exactly.
And so, we're getting into a real bad area here for the people that review plans and the people that certify plans. Now, the other thing is that when you read a light level, when you look at photometrics, where the line, the concentric line is shown, means that is the lumen level. And it says, it's not assumed, it's calculated that on the property line it's 0. You're at the property line. You don't break that plane. And so at the level of the ground, or wherever it hits, that's the level of illumination. I don't read it up here. I have to read it down here.
And I read where it says task surface and where it says how you define task surface,
That's the ground.
a parking lot or area surface.
That's right.
That to me is the ground.
Be on the ground.
That is on the ground or
I
on
would
the
not want to
tabletop.
measure it at a different level than the ground level.
It clears it up right there. That surface, whether I'm at a desk as a student or on the floor or some other object.
And
that
I would
makes
say
sense.
that if a supervisor is holding it at 6 feet height rather than at.
It's inappropriate.
It's inappropriate
It's
read.
not
It's a
appropriate. It's
bad
not a
read.
correct reading.
And that's going to get out of our area of expertise, because when you start reading the lumens, that's going to be more of a code enforcement process that.
Okay, so where are we going here? Would we,
I'm recommending no change to that section. I'm recommending that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan. He can actually testify that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the proposed changes.
I believe it is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
so the changes that we're discussing today, you say are consistent?
Yes, sir.
And the existing ordinance that has been questioned today, you're not recommending any changes on that?
No, sir, we are not at this point.
Mr. Chairman, it's not difficult to argue that it is consistent with the code, with the comp plan. I mean, and that is basically the question that's before us is, does it comply or not? Whether it's a good idea or not isn't before this board, but it's a bad idea. And so I say that it probably is consistent with the comp plan, but it's a poor thing to add to our city.
Well put.
Yep.
Yeah,
But apparently it's already there.
Right, you're not complaining about the proposed language. The proposed language just says, hey, we recognize that people are able to change fixtures and we have an enforcement issue because we're not sitting at Home Depot or Rural King looking to see, or Ace Hardware looking to see when they buy a light fixture, and aha, they got one, let's follow them home or follow them to their business and see how they modify it. So our guys can't enforce the language on the building mounted luminaries. So for that provision, all we're saying is, let's have a cut dead date where the building mounted luminaries, it's a cut dead date in the future, because at that point, from an enforcement perspective, does that lighting meet the shielding? Yes or no? You can make that determination. At this time, you can't tell which is an old light, which is a replaced. Yes, and there's a difference in light. If it's brand new, maybe we could, yeah, but who says somebody's not out there polishing their bulbs? The second prong is just the area where there's absolutely no regulations, and that is the security lights, the ones that FPL installs. It's not the big street lights that the city puts over the street. And we do have situations where they do glare definitely off the property. And what it is it's allowing people to circumvent the existing language that, and yes, it's a low language, and yes, if you like bright lights, I know that it is not a provision that you like, but you're having people say, okay, well, I couldn't get my lights because I followed my photometric plan, my engineer followed my law, so now I'm gonna get FPL to go out there and install, what now looks like Star Wars.
I think Rex's point was not addressed, it's still not addressed, in that who is certifying to this specific law. And I think that the way it's going to work out, Rex, is that when the civil engineer submits the photometrics, that is a responsible person to go to with this. Whether or not the reading happens in the field under litigation or not, it's going to go back to that civil engineer because he submitted the drawings for approval. So he has to stand by those light levels. So
I understand that, but what we're saying is that every building permit will have site verified readings.
That's right.
And that's not happening.
That's right.
And we don't want it to happen because it's a huge expense for somebody. I'm quite
Yes.
sure you engineers don't run out at 10 o'clock at night and take these readings, because you can't take them at noon. You got to take them at night.
I think it's a good point.
So I'm quite sure that if you're going to run out at 10 o'clock at night, you're going to want to charge somebody for that. So I think it's a burden that we're adding that is killing a gnat with a cannon.
Well, what normally happens is when someone is completing their project and they're looking for their certificate of compliance, what they will do is their engineer will write a letter to our engineer stating that we have met the standards of this development order. If there are any changes, if there are any exceptions, they will include that in there. If there's portions that need to be phased out or additional work done.
Then we should say that, John, because
what-
right now, we're not saying that.
Well,
We're
if you read
saying that
chapter
that
3, that's what it does
engineer,
say.
that engineer has
It
to
does say that.
verify that he's site specific.
If you were to look in chapter 3, it's very clear that it says that. And that is where the development order process, both application and inspection and all the way through the certificate of compliance, states the process, who is responsible for what, and what their authority is. So that language is in our land development code, and it's currently being implemented. So
Again, we've got, I think this is a burden on the ice cream shop more than it is on the big development. But our task today is to discuss the changes that are taking place to this ordinance. And anybody else have any more comments? So, being new to this position, what's the next step, Audrey? Do we
I
need to
would-
make a motion?
I would request that somebody make a motion to find this consistent with the comprehensive plan.
So be it. I'll make the motion.
Motion by Bob Finnis.
A second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Second, moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
public comment.
Do we have to have public comment before we vote on it?
There's nobody here, but
Right,
yes,
too.
public has to be allowed to
Any,
participate.
any public comment?
You don't have to call it if no one's here.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 So being new to this position, this is now your fault.
That's all right.
Question.
I've been blamed for stuff for years.
Would we be out of order to make a motion that some of these issues that Rex has brought up, I've brought up, others have brought up about getting this thing changed to where the light meter, if we're talking about the task, is the ground, the meter readings should be on the ground, that on small projects where they're, like if Rex wanted to put new security lighting around his building, he's not going to get a development order for that, is he? It's just going to be a building permit.
It depends on where the lighting will be. If the lighting is on the building, it's a building permit. If the lighting consists of freestanding poles, then it would be, and it was just the lighting, it would be a version of a limited review development order. It would not be a full-blown
Right.
development order.
Well, all I was thinking is getting some language in that defines these cases where you had to have an approval from an engineer versus not, because on a small project like he's doing, more than likely, the way it would be done is the lighting fixture company will develop a computer-generated site layout with foot candle marks all over on like a grid, but I'll guarantee you that that plan that is submitted will not have an engineer's seal on it in a lot of cases.
Actually, those sheets that they have prepared by
Yeah.
lighting companies do have engineer on staff that.
Oh, I understand that, but if
But
the
that's-
seal, if the
that-
seal isn't on there and it's not an embossed seal,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really very binding.
But I will also take the opposing viewpoint to what you've said, because there are situations where that exists, where it's a small fixture, it's minimal impact, no one really suffers
Right.
because of it. At the same time, most of our problems, and most of the problems that, as I understand it, code enforcement receives, are not from the larger developments. If you have 50 acres, 40 acres or
Right.
more, you have the area in which to reduce that light before you get to the property line, or to reduce that glare off adjacent
Right.
properties. Smaller projects tend to be the most difficult projects, because a slight miscalculation results in a significant issue. You don't have the room for error.
Right.
Buildings are closer together. You have more people in a smaller space. In those smaller projects, that's where you're going to see most of the issues, especially when you come back in for, I'll say, moderate redevelopment. And you don't have a complete redesign of a site, but you have a moderate redesign of a site. And a lot of the impacts from those type of projects, where you'll receive most of your complaints over new construction.
I'm going to bring up one more point to confuse everybody, but there needs to be something in here on this. If you have a full moonlit night, I think that's a half a foot candle.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but it doesn't
Well, all
sound
I'm trying to
unreasonable.
say is that if you're concerned about spillage on other properties, you need to have two readings, with the lights on and with the lights off, because that gives you, that net difference
ambient.
is going to tell you what you're really getting from the light.
If there is a situation where it's a full moon, or the reading is showing a violation, I think common sense would prevail in the fact that you take into account, it's just like if there's a noise violation. You take the reading prior to or without
That noise.
that ambient noise, and then you take it with that noise. The same situation should apply here. If you know it's a full moon, if you know it's particularly bright for some reason, and
Consider ambient situations. And this is no different, I'm going to bring up a different subject matter, but it'll segue me into other business later on if we can discuss that. When you start talking numeric nutrient criteria, when you start talking monitoring, and you try to have an exact science, but you can't. And a great example is like in the area of water quality, and I'll give the example Bat Bridge, Matheson. We measure for phosphates, nitrogen. Well, if you have a bridge and you have guano coming down, that's not because of people's fertilizer, that's because you have bats in the area, which is not a bad thing. You want to have the bats in the area, but it's going to change your readings in certain areas. And if you go under a strict numeric nutrient type reading, you'll say, you can't do anything in this area because you're going to cause a problem. It's like, no, you're not. This area has a natural situation. The area near Tampa where they have the bone formation, help me with the name. You have the big phosphate industry there, where you have the mining. Now, mining is bad. We can go through that whole lecture, but you start going into some of these things where you try to do a number. If you're looking at that number all by itself and not considering all the other considerations, you're going to get a strange outcome. And same thing here with lighting. You can get a very strange outcome very easily. And I think, I wish we brought Chris Campbell here today because, Chris can tell you about the enforcement cases that he has to have. So, we have, staff has to administer this, that staff has to make a determination what is a site verified. I think most of the time a site verified is a very easy read. And when it's not, that's when code enforcement comes in. And that's when we say after the fact, hey, we need to do something. And all we're asking for is a few more tools in our arsenal by having, the ability to have the building mounted luminaries go into conformance by a set date, and where we can have the street lights, the security lights set, because those two things do interfere in the actual reading.
Maybe the way to handle this, Fred, is we could do it through a motion or maybe just a recommendation
Yeah.
To the council that at some point in the future that we restudy this ordinance to make these changes. That's not our task today, but maybe through the minutes we could pass that on to the council, and then if anybody had any specific questions about what we'd like to change, then we could discuss those and pass them on to them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think I pretty much agree with you that, all these ordinances are living documents, and as technology moves forward, we have to move forward, and I think it's important. Of course, it's a burden on staff because it's very time-consuming, but we need to keep up with technology, and a lot of the things that were brought up today are very valid, and I agree that we need to look at this.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I have a question for John, if I may. Exactly what Bob was talking about today. The lighting industry is on the verge of a huge transformation into LED lighting and so forth. So the ordinances that we're struggling with today will modifying our world to LED and the new lighting fixtures that are coming aboard in the near future. Will that affect this?
It may. And I cannot give you a definite yes or no simply because I don't even think the lighting industry knows. A few years back, we were looking at the possibility of LED billboards. And that was really my first foray into lighting at that level and what technology was going to bring and what we needed to review. And one of the obvious things that we discussed, and discussed it with several of the sign companies, were LED lights and how those were going to function. My impression and the information they provided me was that LED, while it's the current technology, is not the end technology. They were looking at organic lighting. They were looking at probably 5 or 6 different alternatives and forms of light. Depending on which of those technologies, if any of them, take hold, there could be an impact to our standards. But based upon what the industry is installing and constructing today, no, there's not. And I don't see that changing in the next year or so. But if you look 5 years out or 10 years out, then I think that it's one of the many areas that we need to keep an eye on to make sure that our regulations remain relevant.
Well, I have read about requiring certain kind of lighting in the future on parking lots and so forth because of the much lower energy consumption. And so just like they're doing away with the incandescent bulb, they're going to eliminate that option to us now. So I look at this thing and say we're dealing in the Model T area where there's some huge concepts coming down the road that will probably change our method of measuring the lumens per square foot in the future.
Actually, there's good news and there's bad news behind what you're saying. The good news is that the technology, as I have been informed, allows more precise lighting, which means you would not need to address the lumens at the property line because they would be able to more directly, more accurately provide that light. The bad news is I don't know what form that will take, whether that new form will require different pole heights, more locations, fewer locations, where they would need to locate these lights. There's a lot that could change, but because we don't know what that change is and because the lighting industry does not even know what that change will be, it may be premature to start requiring different standards now. But I do think that this board in, like I said, 5 years, definitely no more than 10 years, will be taking a look at this issue again.
Any other comments? Okay, any public comments at this point? Okay, the next meeting is scheduled for April 10th at 8:30, and we have to approve minutes for November and December's meeting.
I'll make a motion, we approve those.
Is second?
Second?
Been moved and seconded to accept the minutes as written. All those in, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And we adjourned.